Stop scrolling right now, because the San Francisco 49ers just made a move that might not look massive at first glance, but it could quietly change everything about their defensive front. This is the kind of signing that doesn't make headlines until it starts wrecking games on Sundays. And trust me, once you really understand what this player brings, you might look at this defense very differently. And if you're fired up for real, in-depth 49ers breakdowns, and subscribe right now. Let's talk about the newest addition to the squad, Cam Sample. This is not your typical flashy free agency move. This is calculated. This is strategic. And honestly, this feels very 49ers. Because if you've been following this team closely over the past few years, you already know, this coaching staff, especially under defensive line guru Chris Kukurek, has a history of taking overlooked, versatile linemen and turning them into real contributors. So the question is, are we looking at just another depth piece, or the next under-the-radar defensive weapon in San Francisco? Cam Sample comes over from the Cincinnati Bengals on a one-year deal. He's 26 years old, stands at 6 feet 3 inches, weighs in at around 272 pounds, and was originally a fourth-round pick back in 2021 out of Tulane Green Wave. Right away, that size jumps off the page. This is not a lightweight edge rusher. This is a powerful, compact, heavy-handed defensive lineman who can line up in multiple spots, and that's exactly where things get interesting. Because this isn't about where he's been. It's about how the 49ers plan to use him. Let's break it down. Over his NFL career so far, Sample has played in 61 games, mostly as a rotational player. Only 4 starts, but that doesn't tell the full story. He's recorded 7 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, and 26 quarterback hits. Now pause for a second. 26 quarterback hits, in a rotational role, on a defense that hasn't exactly been dominant. That matters. That tells you he knows how to get into the backfield. That tells you he has a plan as a pass rusher. And that's something coaches love, because you can develop technique, you can refine timing, but instinct and understanding. That's harder to teach. Now here's where things get real. Sample isn't your classic bendy, explosive edge rusher. He's not built like Von Miller, flying around the edge with elite burst. He doesn't have that twitch like Leonard Floyd. Instead, he wins differently. He wins with power. He wins with hands. He wins with leverage. And sometimes, especially in the 49ers system, that's exactly what you need. Because this defense isn't just about speed off the edge. It's about waves. It's about versatility. It's about creating mismatches. And Sample fits right into that philosophy. But let me ask you this. Would you rather have a one-dimensional pass rusher, or a guy who can line up anywhere and disrupt the entire offensive line? That's the gamble, and the opportunity, here. One of the biggest talking points around Sample is his tight hips. That's scouting language for a player who doesn't have elite flexibility when turning the corner. In simple terms, he's not going to consistently win by bending around tackles. So what do you do with a player like that? You move him inside. And suddenly, everything changes. On the interior, where the path to the quarterback is more direct, where power matters more than bend, where quick hands and strength can dominate, Sample becomes a completely different type of threat. That's why there's a strong belief that the 49ers could use him both at defensive end and defensive tackle. And if that sounds familiar, it should. Because we've seen this exact blueprint before with players like Charles Omenihu, Arden Key, and Jordan Willis. Guys who weren't superstars, but in this system, they thrived. They became impact players. And in Omenihu's case, he turned that role into a payday with the Kansas City Chiefs. So when you look at Sample, you're not just evaluating his past production, you're projecting what he can become in this environment. Now let's talk about something that might concern fans, his injury history. In 2024, Sample suffered a torn Achilles during training camp, a brutal injury that wiped out his entire season. That's not something you just ignore. That's a major setback. But here's the key detail. He came back in 2025 and played 14 games. 2 starts, 2 sacks, 17 total tackles. And most importantly, he was on the field. That tells you the recovery is real. That tells you the 49ers medical staff is confident. And that tells you this isn't a hope he gets healthy signing. This is a he's ready to contribute move. Now zoom out and look at the bigger picture of this defense. You've got Nick Bosa anchoring the edge, one of the most dominant pass rushers in football. You've got Fred Warner leading the middle, arguably the smartest linebacker in the game. And you're building depth around them with players who can rotate, stay fresh, and attack in waves. Add in interior disruption, young developing talent, and now a versatile piece like Sample. And suddenly, this defensive line starts to look deep. Really deep. Not just top-heavy, but layered. And that's how elite defenses are built. But here's the part that should really get fans thinking. The 49ers might not be done. There's still a clear need for another edge rusher. Whether that comes in the NFL draft or through another veteran signing, this front office knows you can never have too many pass rushers. And imagine this scenario for a second. You add another high-upside edge. Sample becomes part of a rotational unit. Young players continue to develop. And Bosa is still doing Bosa things. That's not just good. That's dangerous. Now let's talk about one more critical trait, length. Sample has around 33-inch arms, and that might not sound like a big deal, but for defensive linemen, it's huge. Length allows you to engage blockers, shed them, control space, and create separation. It's what helps players disengage and make plays. It's what turns a stalemate into a win. And in a system where technique is everything, having that physical advantage matters. A lot. So when you combine his size, his strength, his hand usage, and his positional flexibility, you start to see the vision. This isn't a random signing. This is a system fit. Now here's your question of the day, and I want you to really think about this before you answer. Do you believe Cam Sample can become the next breakout rotational defensive lineman for the 49ers? Or is this just a depth move that won't move the needle? Let me know in the comments. Because this is where things get interesting. Fans are going to be split on this. Some will see the limited stats and say, nothing special. Others will see the traits, the system, the coaching, and say, watch what happens. And honestly, both sides have a case. But if history has taught us anything about the 49ers, it's that they know exactly what they're looking for in defensive linemen. They don't just chase stats. They chase fit. They chase potential. They chase players they can mold. And Cam Sample might be the next experiment. The next project. The next hidden piece that makes this defense just a little bit harder to deal with. So don't underestimate this move. Because sometimes, the players you don't expect much from end up making the biggest impact when it matters most. And here's where things get even more interesting. Because the real story behind this signing isn't just about what Cam Sample has done, it's about what he could become in this system. When you zoom out and look at how the 49ers build their defensive line, you start to notice a pattern. This team doesn't just rely on stars. They rely on waves. They rely on constant pressure, fresh bodies, and players who can step in without the entire system collapsing. And that's exactly where a player like Cam Sample starts to matter more than people think. Because let's be real for a second. Not every snap is going to be played by Nick Bosa. Not every situation is built for a pure speed rusher. Sometimes you need a player who can line up inside, take on contact, and collapse the pocket from the middle. And that's where Sample's skill set becomes valuable. Think about late-game situations. Fourth quarter. Offensive line is tired. Quarterback is under pressure. And instead of just attacking from the outside, you're getting pushed straight back into the pocket. That's uncomfortable for any quarterback. And Sample has the kind of build and strength to create that exact scenario. But here's the bigger question. Can he actually take advantage of this opportunity? Because opportunity is one thing. Execution is everything. And that's where development becomes the key factor. Under defensive line coach Chris Kukurek, we've seen players elevate their game in ways that didn't seem possible before. This isn't speculation, it's a track record. Players come into the system, and suddenly they look faster, more disciplined, more effective. Why? Because they're being used the right way. They're being coached with precision. And most importantly, they're being put in positions where their strengths actually matter. So if Sample is used correctly, if he's placed in those interior pass rush situations, if he's allowed to play to his power and hand usage, then this could quietly turn into one of the smarter moves of the offseason. Now let's not ignore the risk. Because there is risk. That Achilles injury in 2024 was serious. That's not something you just brush off. Even though he returned and played in 2025, the real test is consistency. Can he stay healthy over a full season? Can he maintain explosiveness? Can he handle the physical demands of rotating between positions? Those are real concerns. And if the answer to any of those questions is no, then this move stays exactly what it looks like on paper, a depth signing. But if the answer is yes, then everything changes. And here's something else to think about. The 49ers aren't done building this defensive line. This move doesn't close the door, it opens more possibilities. They can still go after another edge rusher. They can still invest in the draft. They can still stack this unit with even more talent. Which means Sample doesn't have to be the guy. He just has to be a piece. And sometimes, being the right piece in the right system is more valuable than being a star in the wrong one. We've seen it before with Charles Omenihu. We've seen it with Arden Key. We've seen it with Jordan Willis. These weren't headline names, but they became important contributors. And in some cases, they turned that into bigger opportunities elsewhere. So now the question becomes, is Cam Sample next in line? Because the blueprint is there. The coaching is there. The system is proven. All that's left is execution. And don't overlook another key factor, competition. When you bring in a player like Sample, you're not just adding depth. You're raising the standard in the entire room. Young players now have to fight harder for snaps. Veterans can't afford to get comfortable. Every rep in practice becomes more intense. And that kind of environment brings out the best in a team. That's how you build a defense that doesn't just perform, but dominates. Now imagine this scenario for a second. You've got a fully healthy defensive unit. You've got Nick Bosa doing what he always does, commanding attention, drawing double teams, creating chaos. And then, from the inside, you've got rotational players like Sample stepping in and taking advantage of those one-on-one matchups. That's where games start to shift. That's where drives stall. That's where momentum changes. And suddenly, a move that didn't get national attention becomes a key part of winning football. So no, this isn't the biggest signing of the offseason. It's not supposed to be. But it might be one of the smartest. Because it fits the identity of this team. It fits the philosophy of this defense. And it gives the 49ers something they always value. Flexibility, depth, options. And in the NFL, having options is everything. Because injuries happen. Game plans change. Matchups evolve. And the teams that can adjust the fastest are usually the ones still standing at the end of the season. So keep an eye on this name. Not because of what he's done, but because of what he's walking into. A system that knows how to develop. A coaching staff that knows how to maximize. And a defense that's always looking for the next piece to push it over the top. And if everything clicks, don't be surprised if Cam Sample turns into one of those players that fans didn't expect much from, but ended up making a real impact when it mattered most.